Welcome back everyone, it is Eric from Rare Candy, and today I'll be breaking down my current deck list for the new Mewtwo EX and Xatu deck coming to us in Paradox Rift. So this deck does function pretty similarly to the Shadow Rider Calyrex deck of the past, and while that may sound like a little bit of a red flag here, we do have to remember that Shadow Rider at one point was a very viable deck, and this new Mewtwo EX deck actually improves on it in a number of different ways. And before we get into today's deck list, just a heads up guys, if you need any Paradox Rift cards for yourself, friends of the channel over at flipsidegaming.com are still taking pre-orders. Use coupon code RARECANDY at checkout for 10% off, and you'll get free shipping too. But if Flipside is out of stock by the time you find this video, you can also use my affiliate link with TCGPlayer. They'll show you all of the other cheapest online listings, and you can get singles there too. Links to these will be down below in the description. But from there, be sure to smack that like button to feed the YouTube algorithm, and let's jump into this deck list. So to start with, we have a 4/4 Xatu line. And Xatu really is going to be sort of the heartbeat of this deck. Its ability lets us attach a Psychic Energy from hand to one of our benched Pokemon, and then draw 2 cards. So like I said, this is actually very similar to what we had on Shadow Rider Calyrex, but a couple big upsides to this is that it's on a non-rule box single prize Pokemon, and also now we can accelerate energy to non-psychic Pokemon as well. But our main attacker of the deck, of course, is going to be the new Mewtwo EX from Paradox Rift, new Terra Pokemon, so it has that bench protection built right into it. But Mewtwo EX has 2 different attacks here, and I do think this first one is actually a little bit underrated. For a Psychic Energy, you get to attach up to 2 Psychic Energies from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way that you like. We're not always going to use it, but if we are going second on our first turn, we can maybe research our hand away and then end our turn by getting some extra energies out of the discard pile. But the main attack of Mewtwo, of course, is going to be this second one. For 2 Psychic Energy, it does 10 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached to all of your Pokemon. We're just trying to accelerate as many energies as possible into play with Xatu, and then take big one-hit KOs with our Mewtwo EX. We have the new Deoxys, which gives us a single prize attacker to use, and also is frequently this deck's best early game attacking option. Its second attack does 120, and then you move all of its energy to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. In the first few turns of the game, Mewtwo really isn't hitting for any insane numbers with its attack, so instead of putting our main attacker into harm's way, we can instead soften up our opponent with Deoxys and then keep all of that energy safe back on our bench. We have a copy of Mew EX, which does serve a number of different purposes here. Having free retreat is already really great for this card, just because Xatu is limited to only accelerating energy onto bench Pokemon. So in between KOs, we can promote our Mew EX, then charge up the Pokemon we want to attack with, and freely retreat into it. Mew EX's restart ability also does help out a little bit since it allows us to draw until we have 3 cards in hand, which definitely can help out for those turns where you don't have energy in hand to use with your Xatu. And Mew is also still just a solid backup attacker for the deck since it has that genome hacking attack that can copy one of the attacks on your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you don't yet have a ton of energy in play for your Mewtwo, sometimes genome hacking can still steal you a multi-prize KO depending on what you might be up against. And the last Pokemon of the deck is going to be a copy of Manaphy. Even though our Mewtwo EX does have that bench protection built right into it, we do still need some bench protection for our Natus if we're going against decks like Chien-Pao or Lost Box. Otherwise, Pokemon like Radiant Greninja might be able to snipe our Natus before they're able to evolve. Getting into our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Iono. This is going to be our primary draw supporter of the deck. Both players shuffle their hands, put them at the bottom of their deck, and then draw for each prize card they have remaining. So obviously in the early game, this can help us get set up, but in the late game, this does give us one of our multiple disruption options that this deck is going to have. But from there, we have 3 copies of Professor's Research just to discard our hand and draw 7. Every now and again, this could set up some early game plays with Mewtwo's first attack, but also Research is just one of, if not the best draw supporter that we still have in the format. And to round out our supporter cards, we have 2 copies of Boss's Orders just to be able to choose what we want to attack into. But I think one of the biggest advantages this deck has over Shadow Rider decks of the past is the fact that we can play Path to the Peak to shut off the abilities of Rulebox Pokemon. Especially with how many decks are still so reliant on different Rulebox abilities, having this extra bit of disruption in the deck can hopefully slow down our opponent while we're trying to amass this giant board of energy to fuel our Mewtwo's attacks. We have 4 copies of Ultra Ball to find our Pokemon, and like I mentioned with Research, sometimes the discard effect can maybe help set up some plays with the first attack on our Mewtwo EX. One of the best cards this deck has access to is also Fog Crystal. We search your deck for either a basic Psychic Pokemon or a basic Psychic Energy. So in the early game, we can find things like our Natus to get up and going, and then on future turns, we can still use this to get energy to accelerate with our Xatus. But with that being said, we still can't search out Mewtwo or our Manaphy with Fog Crystal, so we do have a couple copies of Nest Ball here to be able to more easily find those Pokemon too. And then from there, we also have a single copy of Capturing Aroma. So initially this actually was a Nest Ball in earlier versions of this list, but as I was playing more and more games with this deck, I kept finding that I wanted more outs to finding Xatu. So if we do flip heads on the Aroma, we can grab Xatu, but if we get tails, it's basically still just as good as a Nest Ball. We have a copy of Switch in the deck, which does help us out since our Xatu is limited to just accelerating energy to bench Pokemon, but also it's just nice to be able to switch instead of retreating, since that can allow us to preserve our energy in play to do more damage with our Mewtwo's. Similarly, we also have a copy of Escape Rope for the same reasons, but this of course also gives us the option to force our opponent to switch. We have a copy of Energy Retrieval to get 2 basic energies from our discard back into our hand, so Energy Retrieval will be able to get some of those lost energies back and allow us to immediately be able to slap them down with our Xatus again. On that same note, we also have a copy of Super Odd to be able to get back energies, but also we can get back Pokemon as well with it. And our final item card of the deck is going to be a copy of Counter Catcher. So initially I did have a third boss's orders, but what I started to find is that frequently we are going to be the player that does fall behind on prizes a little bit earlier. And in this case, Counter Catcher is just better than boss, because if we are behind on prizes, we get to switch our opponent to active with one of their bench Pokemon, but as an item card and not a supporter. And what this means is we can actually do some really oppressive plays where maybe in the mid to late game we can go Path, Counter Catcher, Iono, whereas had this been a boss's orders, we wouldn't be able to do that sort of play from time to time. And for the Pokemon tools we're playing, we have 3 copies of Bravery Charm, which I do think is a very important card for this deck. Mewtwo EX, it's not quite as tanky as Shadow Rider, to say the least. It only has 230 HP, but with Bravery Charm down, that will buff us up to 280 and make Mewtwo much more likely to be able to tank a hit. Because if you're not able to tank for at least a single turn, it makes it really difficult to ever keep pushing your damage cap higher and higher. Looking at our energy cards, we have 12 copies of basic Psychic Energy in the deck, and I will admit this is probably the absolute lowest count I would choose to go with. We need to make sure we always have energy in hand to be able to accelerate with our Xatus, but also we just need a lot of physical energy in play if we ever want to get like big one-shotting attacks off with our Mewtwo EX. Especially if we want to knock out something like a Pokemon VMAX or a Stage 2 EX, we're going to need either 10 or 11 energy in play. So again, just really important we have a high physical count of basic Psychic Energies. But to help us out a little bit more in that regard, we also have a single copy of Reversal Energy. So if we have fallen behind on prizes and we attach this as our energy for turn on our Xatu, this thing will now provide 3 Psychic Energies for us instead of just a single one. So instead of attaching this as a plus 30 damage buff for our Mewtwo, it's now a plus 90 buff instead. But that's going to be my current list for the Mewtwo EX deck. You are sort of trading the extra tanking potential that something like Shadow Rider would give you, but in exchange you get a better ability to accelerate your energies, a little bit more type coverage with Mewtwo, and some good disruption in the form of Path that you otherwise wouldn't be able to use. But with that being said, I definitely want to hear from you guys down below in the comments section. What do you think of this Mewtwo EX deck? Is there anything you would change? Feel free to let me know your full thoughts down below. But if you guys did enjoy today's content, as always, remember to leave a like on the video. And if you're feeling maybe a little extra generous, you can always become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.